Okay, we're going to be doing operations with radical expressions today. And if you want to follow along, we're going to be on page 719 in our algebra book. And I'll do some examples. A couple key things that you want to remember when you're performing operations with radicals. It's kind of like terms when we talked about in algebra before. The big thing to remember is you can only add and subtract like terms. So when we're talking about radicals, you have to have the same number underneath the radical. And I'll show you, in order to add and subtract, and I'll show you a couple examples like that. If you kind of remember, if I've got 3x plus 2y, I can't add those because those aren't alike. But you can multiply things that aren't alike or divide them. So if I had 3x times 2y, that would be 6xy. So it's okay to do multiplication and division, just can't do addition or subtraction with things that aren't alike. And this is going to apply to radicals also. You have to have the same number under the radical. So keep that in mind as we're going throughout these examples. So the first example I'm going to do is number 4 on page 719. I've got 4 times the square root of 5 plus 5 times the square root of 5. Well, in this case, I've got the same number under each radical, so those are considered like terms. So I can go ahead and add their coefficients, which are the numbers outside the radical, or the coefficients. So the answer here is 9 times the square root of 5. Okay, let's take a look at number 6. I've got 3 times the square root of 6 plus the square root of 24. Now in this case, I don't have the same number underneath the radicals, so I can't add those because they're not alike. But if I could factor it, and maybe I could pull some things out to make these things alike. Now I already know that 6 is going to be 2 times 3, so there's nothing that's going to be able to be pulled out of that one. 24 is 2 times 3 times 2 times 2. Now you have to treat these separately because there's not multiplication between them. This is just addition. So in this first radical I can't pull anything out, but in the second radical I've got 2 2's that I can mark out and pull a 2 out. So the second radical would simplify. First one's going to be 3 times the square root of 6. The second one's going to be, if I pull a 2 out, it's 2 times the square root of 6. Now I've got the same number under the radical, so I have like terms. So I add the coefficients, so it's 5 times the square root of 6. Okay, let's look at number 10. I've got 4 divided by the square root of 13. Well, I can't simplify the square root of 13, and I really should have told you yesterday that a operation is, or an expression is not considered simplified if there's a radical in the denominator. So there cannot be a radical in the denominator. You might want to make a note of that. There can't be a radical in the denominator. So we're going to have to get rid of that radical somehow. And the way to do that is, if I could multiply that expression by 1, it would be the same expression. I'm going to rewrite it here. 4 divided by the square root of 13. And the way I could multiply that by 1 and get rid of the radical is multiply it by the square root of 13 over the square root of 13. Remember, we're going to multiply straight across the numerator and straight across the denominator. So the square root of 13 times the square root of 13 is just 13. Because I've got 2 13s, so I can pull 1 out. And then the numerator of the fraction is 4 times the square root of 13. And 4 13ths will not reduce, so that's our answer on number 10. Okay, let's take a look at number 24. So this time I've got the square root of 80 minus the square root of 45. So again, those are not like terms because they don't have the same number under the radical. So I'm going to have to factor each one of those. Now 80 factors down to 2 times 5 times 2 times 2 times 2. And then 45 factors to 5 times 3 times 3. So on the first radical, I've got, here's 2 2's that I can mark out and bring one out. And here's 2 more 2's that I can mark out and bring one out. And then I've still got the square root of 5 left inside. Then on the second one, I've got 2 3's that I can mark out and bring the 1 3 out. So I've got 3 times the square root of 5. So this first one simplifies to 4 times the square root of 5 minus 3 times the square root of 5. Now I have like terms because I've got the same number under the radical. So 4 minus 3 is 1. So I've got 1 times the square root of 5, or just the square root of 5 is the answer. Okay, let's take a look at 32. Now we're getting into the multiplication and division. And these are a lot easier because you don't have to do factoring. You don't have to have the same number under the radical. You can just multiply things that aren't alike. It's okay to multiply those. So I've got the square root of 5 times the square root of 8, which is the square root of 40. Then you do want to simplify that, so I can factor 40 to 2 times 2 times 2 times 5. So I can cross out 2 2's and bring one out. So I've got 2 times the square root, and 2 times 5 is 10. So it's 2 times the square root of 10 is the answer to number 32. Okay, this is the last example, number 34. So we've got the square root of 3 times 5 times the square root of 2 plus the square root of 3. Well, this time in order to get rid of that parentheses, I'm going to have to use the distributive property. So I'm going to have to multiply the square root of 3 by both of those terms inside of the parentheses. So the first one will be the square root of 3 times 5 times the square root of 2, and then I put my plus sign in the middle. Then I've got the square root of 3 times the square root of 3. So on the first ones I can multiply the square roots together, so I've got 5 times the square root of 6. And the second one, the square root of 3 times the square root of 3, I've got 2 3's that I can mark out and bring one out, so it's just 3 with no square root around it. And that's your answer because those are not like terms. So the answer is 5 times the square root of 6 plus 3. So for your homework, I'd like for you to do page 719, numbers 5, 7, 9, and then numbers 19 to 31 odd, and then numbers 35, 41, and 43.